Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank CANactions and all the people involved for this opportunity of being here today and also of being part of this year's festival. As I think Masha was telling you, I am here also because I am part of the Future Architecture Platform, which is basically a European network of museums, foundations, architecture festivals, academics, and also young practitioners collaborating together in what I think is a multitude of very interesting projects. So my name is Tiago Torres Campos, and I am a Portuguese landscape architect and also an assistant professor in landscape architecture at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And since a few years ago, mainly through my research, I became quite interested in this idea of the Anthropocene and how it is leading to massive global changes happening to our landscapes across the globe, and of course how impactful that has been in the discipline of landscape architecture. So, landscapes of the Anthropocene is a still very, very young project and also research network which aims precisely to become a forum for developing and debating ideas, for gathering people interested in this topic, for harnessing good practice, and also for building ideas for the future of our landscapes, or even better, to imagine how our landscapes eventually might look like in the future. My current work as a designer, as a lecturer, that is as a teacher, and also as a researcher, orbits around this topic, and more precisely on the impacts that some of these things may have on our landscapes, our cities, and of course in our wider territories. So, with the time that I have here with you today, which is not a lot as you know, I will very briefly present you my interpretation of the meaning of the Anthropocene, and we'll try to contextualize it a little within the work I currently develop, and also in the wider contemporary discourses in architecture. In the second part of my presentation, I will also very briefly use the Dnieper River, which as you know is one of Europe's greatest rivers, flowing through Ukraine from north to south, as an example of what is the meaning of analyzing our territories through the lens of the landscape, and of using the Anthropocene as this powerful metaphor, and above that as an inclusive framework. Okay, so we have now entered what scientists call the Anthropocene, which is basically an informal way to refer to the contemporary geological epoch in which humans, all of us, have become the dominant force altering the planet. We now move more than twice the earth and soil than all of the oceans, seas, rivers, and lakes combined together. So this is just to give you an idea. We have changed our planet's atmospheric composition, the geological disposition, the levels of radioactivity, or the acidification of land and water. So things like this, which is the Pacific Trash Vortex, which is basically a huge island of rubbish floating on the Pacific Island, or the nuclear disaster in Fukushima in Japan, as you know, or Three Gorges Dam in China, which is the biggest dam in the world, and it is now proven that it is slightly changing the rotation axis of our planet, or even the first environmental refugees are no longer science fiction, but rather these dystopian realities that were caused by us, that were caused by human-induced change. Just earlier this week, to give you an example, we saw in the news that 5 small islands on the Pacific Ocean disappeared all of a sudden because of sea level change. So these things are happening everywhere, all the time. So it may seem to you at this point that I am mainly interested in producing producing an account of the big catastrophes happening on the planet. And I have to tell you that I have gained some reputation amongst some of my friends that I am indeed this guy interested in catastrophes. But I can assure you that first, that is not entirely true, and that second, I will not, it is not my intention at all to spend the next 30 minutes or so narrating about natural and man-made disasters. So basically, change is something that happens everywhere, all the time. Change is indeed the only constant thing in our planet since the dawn of time, and it must be considered, in my opinion, as a positive sign of a fairly small planet in its quest for self-regulation and also for staying alive. One way of making the Anthropocene clearer to everyone, or at least to make it more interesting to everyone, is by narrating it or by telling it as a story. And that is precisely what I'm going to try to do with you today over the next few minutes through an exercise of storytelling. And I am going to use a very short video that was produced by a network of researchers headed by an institution called Global. So let's see how this goes. So, the Anthropocene is the story of how one species changed the planet. Some people think that the last chapter of this story began in England precisely 250 years ago with the many brilliant inventions that gave birth to the Industrial Revolution. Great infrastructure, first with the railways, then of course with the cars and the highways, then with the planes, connected people across the globe. Medical discoveries and new artificial fertilizers saved millions of people and population rose rapidly. But this was just the beginning of what was still to come. And this is where our second key date comes in. The 1950s marked the beginning of the Great Acceleration. This was of course marked by the end of World War II, but also by the beginning of new geopolitical forces and the establishment of what we now call the nuclear era. Globalization, mass tourism, or neoliberalism promoted an exponential growth. People moving to urban perimeters, from rural to urban perimeters that is, ignited the greatest migration on the planet ever. And cities grew even more as powerful engines spreading across our territories. In a single lifetime, humans have grown into a phenomenal global force. Just to give you more information about this, we consume today 400 years of biomass per day in fossil fuels. We manage 3/4 of land outside the ice sheets. Greenhouse gas levels this high have not been seen for over 1 million years, which is quite a long time. Temperatures are increasing. We have made a hole in the ozone layer, although in the meantime it also seems that we have managed to somehow stop it, although no one knows exactly how. We are losing biodiversity with soil depletion, with water contamination and deforestation. Many of the world's deltas are sinking due to damming, mining and other causes. Sea level is rising, as I said, and ocean acidification is a real threat. So we are altering Earth's natural cycles. And this relentless pressure on our planet risks unprecedented destabilization. Nevertheless, and this is precisely where I think that the Anthropocene as an idea perhaps becomes more interesting, lots of us believe there's still hope. We are all part of the story, you know, and the raising awareness and increasing knowledge about our interference with the Earth's systems also comes with great responsibility. As the population grows to 9 billion, we must find a safe operating space for humanity for the sake of our future generations. Buckminster Fuller, the American architect, called it Spaceship Earth, as you know, and he even wrote a brilliant manual for us to operate with it. So, you see, the problem is not change itself, but the speed with which it now happens, and the conscience that the planet may eventually not cope with it for long. When analyzed through numbers, such as these that you see on the screen, the Anthropocene is a series of astonishing exponential curves that have led some researchers to think that the asymptote is this exponential curve, is our new aesthetic paradigm, or at least one of our new aesthetic paradigms. Today, philosophers, artists, and designers use these ideas also to understand the cultural and the aesthetical shifts we are provoking. And the Anthropocene excites me as an idea because it allows us all to think experimentally about things like scale, space, or time. So, with this story in mind, I will very briefly focus on Ukraine and on a brief research by design exercise that I have been conducting since I accepted the invitation from CANactions to come here today. And this is still an ongoing exercise, so please bear with me. Okay, so this is a bit dark, but that is the Dnieper River. And being the third largest river in Europe, the Dnieper rises near Smolensk in Russia and flows to the Black Sea through the western part of Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine. With water sources that compose around 80% out of all Ukraine, the Dnieper's very big water basin spreads across almost 42% of this country's territory and has, at least historically, bisected Ukraine into two parts, or two halves, the right bank and the left bank. Today, many of the cities that have existed along the river since ancient times, some of which are now over 1 million people, with Kiev being just under 3 million, face increasingly complex challenges. Equally, many of the industries and farmland that depend on this river and the water of this river are also experimenting very similar challenges. The Dnieper's rapid transformation throughout the 20th century has resulted in a construction of a cascade of dams and hydroelectric stations that divide up the river's length into smaller yet interconnected units. Although still perceived as a river from its northern source in Russia to the Black Sea in the south, the Dnieper has changed its character in terms of its hydrological regimes, that is, the way they manage the water. In turn, this hydrological management of such a massive river has naturally brought about changes in both the urban and the rural landscapes, and also shifts in the way the river's ecology and the environmental conditions operate. The title of this first analytical exercise, Dnieper, a river, with this question, aims to be a provocation that hopefully encourages people to rethink the role of this transboundary river in the contemporary Ukrainian territory. Soil and water contamination, some of which, as you know, in the form of radionuclides from the Chernobyl nuclear meltdown of 1986, but also air pollution from the increasing industry and urban pressures in some of the valleys, and you can feel that in Kiev, and even the potential flooding risk posed in case the dams eventually fail, are amongst some of the most significant issues. So in the Anthropocene epoch, rivers such as the Dnieper and other prominent landscape features with local, territorial, or even sometimes even continental expression must be, in my opinion, understood as dynamic systems that are in constant change and constant evolution. The Dnieper's long history certainly attests for a successful relationship between the water, the people, the local fauna, and the local flora. Yet these great and still, in my opinion, largely underestimated changes may cause serious challenges in the existing balances. At first glance, an eventual, let's say, just as a scenario, an eventual failure of the dams might sound too obscure. And again, I know here I am talking about disasters. But natural disasters, such as, for instance, a powerful earthquake, or human-made disasters, or terrorist attacks, or even something as common here in Ukraine as unusually thick ice plates drifting over the reservoirs that exist in Ukraine and drifting over the dam in the winter raise, in my opinion, incredibly pertinent questions around our current understanding of the Dnieper and similar rivers throughout the world, and the possibilities it eventually might open for Ukraine in the future. For the second part of this analytical exercise that I'm presenting to you today, I then focused on the city of Kiev. And what I'm currently doing, and I'm still doing it, is I'm investigating the meaning of foregrounding the river in Kiev's expanding urban perimeter. So, Kiev, this is very dark, I'm sorry, Kiev shares its long history with the Dnieper River. Just like the river bisects Ukraine into two halves, as I said before, such was the same fate with the city. So the older right bank spreads across densely forested hills, as you know, steep sloped ravines, and it's crossed by many small streams. And here exist some of the oldest and most striking monuments, institutional buildings, and memorials of the city, some of which, as you know, are considered today as part of UNESCO's World Heritage. Throughout the 20th century, when Ukraine was experiencing a very fast growth, Kiev expanded its perimeter to the lowlands that compose the left bank. And the expansion of the city into these lowlands meant a great deal of hydro and structural engineering projects. So the construction of the big dam immediately upstream in the decade of the 1960s was paralleled with significant actions of drainage and soil creation or consolidation with artificial landfills at the expense of sand deposits, and the differences are astonishing. However, as the city was developing and its population was growing, it started to lose its former relationship with the river that most probably justified its existence in the beginning. So just to give you an idea, today, only 15% of the whole length of the Dnieper within Kiev's urban perimeter is fully accessed. And these are the white, blue lines that you probably can see very well. 55% of the length of this river within Kiev is seriously damaged and offers medium to high risk of utilization. And the remaining 30% are completely closed for public use. Now imagine what this means in a city that has perhaps the most beautiful marshlands that I've seen for a long time within an urban perimeter. So the islands that flow along the river. So from a massive figure crossing the territory on which the city has laid its foundations, the river was slowly pushed to an ambiguous and, dare I say as well, sometimes even dangerous background. So the act of foregrounding the river, the Dnieper, in Kiev, as I tried to do in this second exercise, is nothing new, don't get me wrong. Instead, it is not only the recognition that the river was once a figure with a major role in this territory because it connects the local scale of the city directly with the vastness of the many continental scales that it goes through, but it is also the proposal to once again rescue the river from the forceful oblivion that it has been devoted since less than a century ago, because these big changes mainly started in the 1960s. So foregrounding what has been pushed to the background is, in my opinion, of course, an exercise of great interest within the scope of the Anthropocene. First, because it contextualizes the city within the greater spatial and temporal scales of the river. Second, because it promotes unexpected yet meaningful encounters amongst massive and also minimal changes happening to this landscape in Kiev. And third, because it can also become a powerful tool to assess strengths and weaknesses, threats and possibilities in the city of Kiev. So in this basically city plan of the city that you can see, I tried to map out 3 potential, and please bear in mind that I'm talking about potential risks and how they may eventually acquire spatial expression. The first, which you can't really see, so the orange dots that cover the reservoir in the north of the map, refer to the contamination with water pollutants from the dam, most of which come from drainage and leakage from the rivers upstream, one of which passes right next to Chernobyl, as you know. The second is that these blue dots that spread across the valley, and they refer to the hydrological risk of flooding in case the upstream dam fails eventually. And finally, the one with the brown dots that makes this curve on the bank represents the geological risk of landslide on the right bank of the Dnieper, which is precisely the historical part of the city where we are now. However, it is important to me to tell you at this point that this image, this plan, should perhaps be read less as a map of risk assessment, because the information is not that precise and it's not scientifically tested, but more as the possibilities that the map offers in terms of its action of foregrounding and the possibilities it brings to alternative representations and forcefully also perceptions of the city, which is ultimately what I'm interested in. So, the still controversial term Anthropocene is a relatively new word that entered our vocabulary in the early 2000s during a conference of geology and stratigraphy by the hand of the Dutch chemist and Nobel Prize winner Paul Crutzen. In less than 10 years, because this was in the early 2000s, in less than 10 years, the concept became dominant in science and also later in the humanities. Now, putting this controversy that happens in some scientific circles to a side, I can go back to the controversy if you want later on, but putting that to a side right now, I reckon that the Anthropocene can indeed be a powerful and meaningful metaphor to contextualize our efforts in engaging with the real costs of our transformations. Discussions around or about the Anthropocene have been fruitful in many fronts, some of which are concerned with the impact they have on our cultural identity, on our ways of understanding our cities and our planet, and of course, on our design processes. Today, there are many disparate, yet hopefully interlinked studies, ideas and debates around the Anthropocene. In my opinion, they are extremely interesting, since they open up exciting streams of exploration and investigation about the impacts some of these massive changes have on our landscapes and, of course, on our everyday lives, and also on the significance that brings to our contemporary representations and perceptions of landscape, which, as I said, is what I'm ultimately interested in. When transported to the field of architecture, they may help us think critically about contemporary discourses, ways to convey and represent new approaches, and also, and perhaps even more important than that, ways to communicate and engage with wider or at least alternative audiences. Right now, I am naturally more interested in raising meaningful questions than in the answers they eventually may portray. So this is also an invitation to any of you who perhaps is interested in the same topics to discuss them. One of the most important questions to me, at least right now, is how can architecture stop being just a reaction to change in order to become also a propositional dialogue between human and non-human worlds? How can our landscapes our cities and our territories become facilitators and mediators in these more than human works. So, as a conclusion, at least for now, and echoing the words of the Australian professor Libby Robin, I would say that cultural institutions and forums, such as this one here today with all of us, have, in my opinion, a very important role in raising awareness of these topics, whilst also enabling communities, different kinds of communities, to get on with living positively with the changes of the Anthropocene. So, working through the traction of the imagination, to use Libby Robin's own words, culture may expand the possibilities for ways to live with the future as it unfolds. Thank you very much.